I opened my eyes around 6:15 that morning, just like I had every day since I moved into my son-in-law's house. The guest room where I slept sat at the far end of the hallway, small, with a single window that barely let the morning light slip through. At that hour, you could always hear the groan of old pipes in the walls and the steady hum of the refrigerator down in the kitchen. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders, and reached for the cardigan draped over the chair. Then I smoothed the quilt carefully, the way Marcus always did, and glanced at my wrist. The silver bracelet he gave me caught a sliver of sunlight. It was the last thing he put on me before he passed. Sometimes when the light hit it just right, I could almost feel his fingers clasping it around my wrist, warm and sure. I made my way downstairs, stepping lightly so I wouldn't wake Elena. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge and took out the chicken, a few carrots, and a yellow onion. Whenever I could, I made her favorite soup, the one she used to beg me for when she was little. She said it smelled like Sunday mornings with her mama. I chopped the vegetables on the worn cutting board, while the small radio I'd brought with me murmured the morning news. The rhythm of the knife, the low voice of the announcer. It was my way of easing into the day. I heard footsteps behind me. Derek crossed the kitchen without so much as a good morning. He wrinkled his nose like something had gone sour and muttered that the smell was too strong this early. I told him gently it was the soup Elena always loved, but he just huffed and kept walking, like my presence in his kitchen was some kind of daily irritation he had to endure. I tossed the vegetables into the pot with a little oil, and the warm, familiar smell started to rise. I lifted the lid and stirred the chicken so it wouldn't stick. That's when Derek came back, this time with his phone in his hand and his brow furrowed tight. Apparently, he was on a video call, and the sound of my wooden spoon hitting the pot was bothering him. "Can you stop making so much noise?" he said, louder than necessary. I apologized and turned the heat down a bit, but he walked right up to the stove, sniffed the air, and wrinkled his nose again. "This kitchen smells like a greasy diner. Don't turn my house into some cheap cafeteria." I said I'd try to keep the smell from spreading, that I'd close the lid and crack a window. I hadn't even finished my sentence when he yanked the wooden spoon out of my hand, so hard I nearly lost my balance. Before I could react, he flipped it around and pressed the hot metal end against the back of my hand. I heard a sizzle, sharp and immediate. The burn shot up my arm like a line of fire. I dropped the dish towel I'd been holding in my other hand. A little broth splashed onto the edge of the stove. I stood there, breathing slowly through my nose, trying not to make a sound. Just then, Elena came down the stairs in her bathrobe. When she saw me holding my red, blistering hand and saw the spoon thrown in the sink, her eyes went wide. "What happened?" she asked, rushing over. Before I could say anything, Derek cut in. "Your mother almost set the house on fire. She doesn't know how to cook, Elena." I tried to downplay it. I said I was just making the usual soup, but Derek shot me that look he uses when he wants to make me feel small in front of her. Elena looked at my hand, saw the mark turning darker, but said nothing. Her gaze moved to Derek, like she was asking permission to speak. But he gave her a look so cold, she actually took a step back. Then he walked over to the radio and snapped it off. "Start over," he told me, "and this time, do it right." He tossed the spoon into the sink like it was garbage. I picked up the towel and wiped down the stove, trying to ignore the sting crawling up from the burned skin. Derek threw the windows open hard, as if the air itself was poisoned. Elena approached with a glass of lukewarm water. She'd barely handed it to me when Derek called her from the living room. "We need to talk, now." She set the glass on the counter and walked away without looking back. I was left alone in the kitchen, with my hand throbbing and the soup half finished. I started chopping another onion to begin again. My eyes were watering. I don't know if it was from the onion or from the knot of pain and shame pressing against my chest. From the living room, I could hear their voices, low at first, then slowly rising. Derek had that sharp, commanding tone. Elena barely responded. No matter how much I tried to focus on chopping, every word came through clear. I can't stand having a washed-up old woman here, Derek said. This isn't a nursing home. I pressed my lips together and stirred the pot, trying to ignore the tightness building in my throat. I tasted a bit of the broth with a small spoon. Even though my hand was shaking, I knew the flavor was right. I covered the pot and let it simmer on low. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a promotional text from the phone company. It took me several tries to swipe the screen because my burned hand wasn't cooperating. I stared at the reddish, swollen skin, wondering how long it would take for the pain to fade. When the soup was ready, I turned off the stove and set the pot aside to cool. I wanted to serve some for Elena before she left for work, like I always did. But before I could grab a bowl, Derek came back into the kitchen. He looked at the pot and let out a dry laugh. Nobody's going to eat that. Eat it yourself. Elena was standing behind him in the doorway. She didn't look me in the eyes. She just lowered her head and nodded weakly, obeying her husband's decision as if she no longer had a will of her own. I said nothing. I just carefully picked up the pot, carried it to a corner of the kitchen, and set it on a low shelf. I stayed silent, so I wouldn't make things worse. So I wouldn't provoke another argument. I wanted to ask them to at least try it, but I stopped myself. I didn't have the strength anymore. I covered the pot, took a deep breath, and tried not to spill anything as I moved it. The smell of the soup, the same smell that had filled our little apartment for so many happy years, now felt out of place in this house where I no longer belonged. And that's how that day began. A day that, though I didn't know it yet, would mark the beginning of my fall and also the beginning of something that would change my entire life. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. That morning after the soup was tucked away in the corner, I tried to focus on making a simple breakfast. I scrambled a couple of eggs, dropped bread into the toaster, and squeezed 3 oranges because Elena always preferred fresh juice, bright and cold. I moved slowly, careful not to bump into anything or make unnecessary noise. The burned skin on my hand was still hot and stung every time I stretched my fingers, but I chose to ignore it. I told myself the important thing was for Elena to start her day without tension. I had just finished setting the table when Derek came downstairs with his laptop in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. He sat down without greeting me, opened the computer, and put on his headphones. "I'm joining a meeting," he said in a warning tone. "Stay out of the camera frame. Stay away." Elena appeared behind him, her hair tied back hastily. She gave me a small smile, almost automatic. "Strong, Mom. If you want, you can sit with us," she murmured softly. "Strong." But Derek looked up from his laptop and shot her a withering glare. "Strong. I'd prefer my colleagues not to see this," he said, waving his hand in my direction without even looking at me. Strong. Strong, I felt like I was being shoved into an invisible corner. I ended up sitting at the very end of the table, barely touching the chair, like an awkward guest in my own family. I looked down at my plate, trying not to interrupt anything. Strong. Derek took a bite of egg, frowned, and pushed the plate aside. Strong. "This is bland," he complained. "Is it that hard to add some salt?" Strong. Elena, without a second thought, said, "I'm sorry, love. I'll get you something else if you want." I sat frozen, a lump forming in my throat. I was the one who cooked it, but she preferred to apologize rather than contradict him. I tried to say I could make another plate, that maybe the seasoning was too light, but Derek raised his hand, cutting me off. "Don't make excuses. When something's wrong, it's wrong. That's it." I swallowed hard and looked down. There was something in his voice that made the words heavier, as if each syllable was being driven into the air like a nail. A few minutes passed. Derek snapped his laptop shut. "I need to talk to you," he said to Elena. "In the living room." She followed him without a word. I heard the soft thud of the door closing. Like he tried not to slam it, but it still echoed in my chest. I was left alone in the kitchen, trying to distract myself by tidying the dishes. The silence didn't last long. Through the wall, I began to hear the argument grow. Derek's voice got louder and sharper. Elena responded in whispers that barely reached me. I tried to move away from the noise by shifting the pot to reheat the soup a little. The aroma helped me breathe easier, though my burned hand started to throb again. As I lifted the pot to place it back on the burner, the handle slipped, slick with sweat and the sting of my injury. The pot slipped from my grasp. The crash on the floor sounded like a small explosion. Soup spread everywhere, across the tiles, the little rug, the base of the cabinets. The impact also knocked over 2 plates drying in the rack, shattering them into pieces. Within seconds, Derek burst into the kitchen like someone had yelled fire. Elena was right behind him, her eyes swollen. "What did you do now?" Derek yelled. "Are you sabotaging my house on purpose?" I immediately knelt on the floor, trying to gather the ceramic fragments without making more of a mess. But my burned hand forced me to pause. The pain was too much. Elena bent down to help me, but Derek grabbed her arm and pulled her up. "Leave her. She cleans this." "It's her mess," he said coldly. Then he took out his phone and started taking pictures, moving around the puddle of soup like a detective at a crime scene. "This is evidence," he said as he snapped photos. "I'm not paying a cent for damage caused by her." I tried to explain that it was an accident, that the pot was hot and my hand wasn't responding well, but he let out a short, bitter laugh. "Accident?" he repeated. "Yesterday you spilled red wine on the carpet. The day before, you broke a bottle of oil. How many more times before you admit you're just a burden?" I felt my chest tighten, like someone was squeezing it. Elena looked at her husband, then at me, with the silent desperation of someone trapped between 2 walls. I knew she wanted to help me, wanted to defend me, but she couldn't open her mouth without Derek crushing her with another look. I bent down to clean the soup with an old rag. Every movement made the burned skin hurt more, but I preferred that to the sharp silence that had taken over the house. Even the sound of my fingers brushing the floor seemed too loud. Derek turned around and said, "When you're finished, make sure there's not a single drop left. I don't want any smells. And if you hurt yourself, it's not my problem." He slammed the living room door. The frame rattled slightly. Elena stood in the doorway for a few seconds. She looked like she wanted to walk toward me, but Derek called her from inside. "Elena," he said with that voice full of control, "come here now." She pressed her lips together, glanced at me briefly, then lowered her head. She took a step back and closed the door behind her. I was alone again. The smell of the soup on the floor, mixed with the broken ceramic, made my stomach clench. I moved carefully, picking up every piece, cleaning every stain, breathing through my mouth so I wouldn't feel my chest close up with sadness. When I finally finished and stood up, leaning on the counter because my back ached, Derek came out of the living room. He looked at my hand, which was still red and swollen. "If you hurt yourself more, deal with it alone. I'm not responsible for anything," he said without emotion, like someone reading a notice posted on a street pole. Then he went upstairs without waiting for a reply. Elena stayed behind at the edge of the hallway. Her eyes were glassy, her shoulders slumped. She looked at me for a long time, as if she wanted to say 1,000 things and couldn't say any of them. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the dining room clock. That silence, her silence, that's what hurt the most. Because it was the silence of the person who had protected my heart the most for years. She said nothing, and her silence made me understand something I hadn't wanted to accept, that I no longer belonged in that house, that little by little they were pushing me toward the door, not with shouts, not with blows, just with a silence that said everything. That afternoon, the heat of the day began to fade, but my hand continued to burn as if the wound had deepened. I sat in one of the patio chairs, far from the noise inside the house. Elena, before leaving for work, had discreetly passed me a bag of ice wrapped in a kitchen towel. "Put this on for a while, Mom," she said in a low voice so Derek wouldn't hear. I sat there holding the bag against the swollen skin, feeling the momentary relief of the cold. The patio was newly decorated. Elena had chosen the plants, but Derek insisted on buying the new furniture: a long beige sofa, a small wooden table, 2 modern design chairs. They had nothing to do with my daughter's style, but it was obvious who made the decisions in that house. I was trying to distract myself by watching the sunlight filter through the leaves of the tree, when I heard the sliding door open abruptly. Derek came out with a cold beer in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He didn't even look at me at first. He went straight to the table, set the bottle down, and watched me as if I were an intruder sitting in his garden. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, as if he couldn't stand finding me in any corner of the house. "And don't sit on that sofa. It's new. You'll get sweat on it." I stood up slowly, trying not to show that my hands still hurt. "I was just getting some air," I said. "I'm going in." I took a step toward the door, but he stood in front of me, blocking the way. His shadow fell right on top of mine. "No, wait," he said, holding out the papers. "Read this." I took the sheet with my good hand. The title read, "House Rules for Temporary Stay." It was a document he had written in large letters with narrow margins. I read each line very slowly. Do not use the kitchen after 8 p.m. Do not use the living room at any time. Do not make noise during meetings or work sessions. Do not use the washer or dryer during peak hours. Pay for your own food and hygiene items. I was silent for a moment. I didn't understand what was happening. Elena had never mentioned any of this. Never. "What is all this about?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Derek took a swig of beer and shrugged as if it were obvious. "This house isn't a nursing home. If you want to stay temporarily, you follow the rules. Simple as that." I felt a strange mix of shame and disbelief. I opened my mouth to tell him that I cooked, I cleaned, I did the shopping, that I had never asked for anything, that I was only trying to help. I started to say. He cut me off. "You're not helping. You're trying to control the kitchen like it's yours. It's not. And Elena is going to sign these rules tonight. So you better start thinking if that sounds fair to you." I froze, not because of the words, but because of the certainty with which he said them, as if Elena had already decided something without me knowing. I handed the sheet back to him carefully. "I want to talk to Elena first," I requested, "before she signs anything. That's all." "Strong?" Derek sighed as if I had asked for a huge favor. "Strong?" "Make it quick," he said, and he didn't a single word even director. When Elena got home from work, it was almost 7. She looked tired, her shoulders tense, her hair down. As soon as she walked in a low voice, but his tone was anything but gentle. She barely had time to set down her purse when he took her arm and led her toward the bedroom. The door shut with a thud. I stayed in the kitchen, drying the same dish towel for the umpteenth time, trying to keep my hands busy so I wouldn't listen. But the walls were thin. I could hear their voices from the hallway, and every phrase cut through me like a cold thread. First Derek's tone, then Elena's muffled crying, then, suddenly, "Either she goes or I go. You decide," Derek said in that tone that accepted no argument. Elena replied with something, but so quietly I couldn't understand her. I only heard a choked sob, as if she were trying to ask him to lower his voice. I stared at the sink without really seeing it. I didn't know where to put my hands. I didn't know where to put my pain. The bedroom door opened. Derek came out first, his expression hard and unreadable. In his hand, he was carrying my suitcase. My suitcase. Elena walked behind him, her eyes full of tears, clutching her phone. Derek left my suitcase by the front door as if it were a package that had arrived in the mail. Elena approached me slightly. Her voice was a very thin thread. "Mom, maybe it would be good if you found another place for a few days. Just until things calm down." It was the first time I had heard her speak like that, as if she wasn't my daughter, as if she was afraid of irritating someone else. "You want me to leave?" I asked. She looked away. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Derek intervened immediately. "It's best if you leave as soon as possible. This house isn't big enough for 3 adults, especially one who doesn't know how to respect other people's space." He took out his wallet, grabbed $200 bills, and crumpled them into my hand. "Here, a cheap motel should be enough. Don't say I didn't help." I looked up at Elena. She opened her mouth as if wanting to say something, but Derek put his hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to talk to her anymore," he told her. She swallowed and nodded. I stood there for a moment, looking at my suitcase on the floor. Then I said, "I don't want to cause any more trouble. I'll leave today." Elena tried to smile, but the corner of her mouth trembled. Her eyes were wet. I wanted to hug her, to tell her it was okay, not to worry, but Derek had already opened the door and was pointing outside. "Go on," he ordered. "It's not my fault it's getting dark." I picked up my suitcase. The sound of the wheels on the threshold was the last thing I heard before the door closed behind me. Hard, dry, like a sentence. The sky was darkening. The streetlights were starting to come on one by one. The air felt colder than usual, maybe because I no longer had a roof to return to. I tried to call a taxi, but when I turned on my phone, I saw the message, 2% battery. I didn't even have time to open the app, so I started walking. The suitcase felt heavier than usual. Or maybe it was me who was more tired than ever. I reached the nearest bus stop and sat on a plastic bench that was freezing cold. There weren't many people, just a man sleeping and a woman rummaging through her bag restlessly. When the bus finally arrived, I paid the fare with $1.75 and sat by the window. I watched the lights pass by like blurry smudges. The bus went through streets I knew well, past buildings where I had once worked cleaning offices, organizing files, answering phones. But now it all passed by as if it had never been part of my life. I got off downtown. The streets were full of noise, but I only heard my own breathing. I looked for a cheap hotel, one I had stayed at once when I worked out of town, but it was full. I went to the next one, also full. I asked at another, booked solid. In the end, I wound up in front of a park. The park was right across from the public library. It had stone benches, a dry fountain, and a few dry bushes. I chose a bench that was somewhat clean and left my suitcase next to my legs. The cold of the night enveloped me immediately. I put on the old coat I always carry with me. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying not to think about anything. And so my first night without a home began. Without a plan, without knowing what I was going to do the next day. Just me, my suitcase, and a silence that seemed bigger than the whole city. The night wind grew colder than I had imagined. It seeped through every seam of my coat, as if looking for a gap to settle in my bones. I zipped up my coat to my neck and hunched my shoulders forward to save some warmth. The stone bench was ice cold, hard as freshly set concrete. Even though I tried to lean my back against the edge, the cold quickly rose from the surface to my skin. I looked around. The park was almost empty, except for some yellowish lights that flickered, as if they were about to go out. In the distance, a group of young guys walked among the trees, talking too loudly for the time of night. Their laughter mixed with stray words I couldn't make out, but the mocking tone put me on alert. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, as if that piece of luggage was the last thing keeping me from getting completely lost. They didn't even look at me as they passed, but instinct told me it was better to keep everything close. A woman was pushing a shopping cart full of empty cans and plastic bags. She was wearing warm but old clothes, and she walked shuffling her feet with a slow rhythm. When she passed in front of me, she stopped for a second. She looked me up and down, as if trying to guess how long I'd been on the street. Then she slowly shook her head without a word and continued on her way to another end of the park. The sound of the cart's wheels echoed off the cold tiles and faded into the distance. The City Hall clock tower struck 11 with a dry sound. I tried to lie on my side to avoid the lamppost light shining directly in my face. I closed my eyes, but the cold air seeped in from everywhere. I had barely managed to get comfortable when a white beam of light hit me. I opened my eyes and saw a park security guard holding a powerful flashlight pointed right at my face. "Are you planning to stay here tonight?" he asked. Not unkindly, but without much patience either. I nodded. "Just for today," I replied. The guard watched me for a few more seconds, then said, "Don't make a scene or light any fires. Families come through here early in the morning." And he continued his round. I tried to close my eyes again, but around midnight, the sound of an ambulance pierced the park, its lights reflecting off the nearby buildings. I sat up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The bench had left my back stiff, and when I tried to straighten up, I heard my joints crack, as if I'd been sleeping outdoors for years. Not far away, an older woman, stooped with tangled gray hair, walked toward me. She limped slightly and seemed to carry the weariness of a lifetime in her steps. She stopped in front of me and raised a finger in greeting. "I'm Rosa," she said in a hoarse voice. "Used to work in a laundromat. Well, about 15 years ago." I shook her hand. Hers was cold but firm. "I'm Mara," I replied. "I don't have any food, if that's what you're asking." She smiled with one side of her mouth and started searching inside a plastic bag she was carrying. "Nobody has food here," she said, "but I got lucky today." She pulled out half a stale loaf of bread, wrapped in a crumpled napkin, and held it out to me. "Eat it. The night is freezing, and if you don't eat, you'll wake up shattered tomorrow." I accepted it with a thank you that came out more sincere than I expected. I ate slowly, even though the bread was dry and hard to chew. But the simple fact of having something in my stomach brought back a little warmth. Rosa sat on the next bench and looked around, like someone who knows the patterns of the street. "Sometimes the police come by around 4, she commented. "They don't like us sleeping on the benches." "If you want to sleep without being kicked out, come with me." I followed her to the front of the library. Under a small overhang, 3 people were already lying on cardboard. One was snoring. Another seemed to be awake, staring at the ground. And the third had their head tucked under a very thin blanket. Rosa unfolded a piece of cardboard and placed it on the ground. "Lie down here. It's not comfortable, but it's better than the ground." I sat down slowly on the cardboard. It wasn't warm, but at least it wasn't as hard as the bench. I lay down slowly, covering my head with my coat to block the light from the downtown streets. The sound of cars on the avenue mixed with the occasional sound of a cough. Once someone walked nearby and kicked an empty can, and the metallic echo bounced off the library walls. I tried to relax, but every so often, my burned hand would start to throb with pain under my coat sleeve. Around 1 in the morning, the cold intensified. The skin where I had the burn began to sting again, as if the freezing air was getting under it. I searched for my phone in my pocket. The screen lit up with a faint glow. 6% battery. I thought for a moment before typing. In the end, I wrote just a few words. "I'm okay. Take care, sweetheart." I pressed send. No reply came. I turned off the phone to save what little battery was left and lay down again. But sleep wouldn't come. In the distance, a group of young people passed by on bicycles, laughing and shouting things at those of us sleeping under the overhang. One of them said something like, "Get a job!" and let out an exaggerated laugh. Rosa got up, raised her hand, and told them to get lost. The kids continued on their way, laughing as if it were a game. Minutes later, a police car circled the park. The blue and red lights lit up the pavement, and I heard the car's radio spitting out codes I didn't understand. An officer got out and walked toward us. "Keep it down," he said simply. "I'll be back in an hour." No further comment, just that. He left. I tried to sleep again, adjusting my body on the cardboard, but every position felt worse than the last. My back burned. My shoulders were tense, and the cold was seeping in through my shoes. Around 4, I heard a hum. It was the vending machine in front of the library, turning on again. I approached it with the $2 I had left and punched in the number for a bottle of water. The machine made a couple of sounds, swallowed the money, and finally displayed a message in red. Error. I hit the button gently. Nothing. The money was gone. I stared at the machine as if it could explain to me why life had turned so bitter so quickly. I felt a weight in my chest, a mix of anger and resignation. $2 is nothing to many. For me that night, it was all I had. Rosa came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes that's how the street is," she said in a low voice. "It takes more than it gives." I nodded without a word. We went back to the library overhang. I sat down on the cardboard again, hugged my suitcase, and watched as the sky slowly began to lighten. A very soft orange hue spread behind the buildings, pushing the darkness into the corners. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. I wasn't asleep, just tired. Very tired. That sunrise marked something I never thought I'd experience. My first night as a homeless woman. A woman who had a family, a place, a life, and who was now sitting on a piece of cardboard, waiting for the sun to rise to feel a little less cold. After that night under the library overhang, I woke up with my body numb and my mouth dry. Rosa touched my shoulder gently with her fingertips, like someone waking a person who has slept too little. "Come on, Mara," she said. "The church on the corner gives breakfast until 9. If we don't get there early, the bread runs out." I packed up my suitcase, stood up as best I could, and followed her. We walked 2 blocks to a gray building with a white cross at the entrance. In the courtyard, there was a long line of people, most with broken backpacks, old coats, or shopping carts full of things that were essential to them. The air smelled like cheap coffee and toast. Rosa showed me where to stand in line. We waited about 20 minutes. When we finally got to the front, a young volunteer with a red scarf and eyes full of energy asked me if I wanted a scarf or a hot towel. "A scarf, please," I replied. She took out a light blue one, folded it carefully, and handed it to me as if she were giving me something valuable. Square. I took a tray with 2 pieces of toast, a little peanut butter, and a cup of watery coffee. I sat on the church steps while the morning sun tried to warm the air a little. I looked around. There were elderly people wrapped in blankets, young men with lost gazes, women trying to calm their children, all gathered in that courtyard as if it were a makeshift refuge for tired souls. I wondered at what point I had ended up there, mixed among them. Yesterday, I was at my daughter's house. Today, I was in line for a free breakfast. Rosa sat next to me and told me that today she would try to find another place to sleep, because the police usually cleared out the downtown area at night. "I don't want an officer to catch you at 4 in the morning, she warned. "They can be tough, you know." I nodded. At that point, any practical advice was worth a lot to me. Before leaving, I opened my suitcase to organize the few things I had. As I checked the small inner compartment, I touched something soft and familiar. It was Marcus's brown jacket, the same one he wore every winter, the one that still had his faint scent if you brought your nose close. I took it out carefully. As I shook it to fold it, a pale yellow envelope fell onto my legs. I froze for a few seconds. In a corner of the envelope, I recognized Marcus's handwriting. He had that firm stroke that never changed, even when he was sick. I sat down next to a tree to open it calmly. My hands were shaking from the cold, but also from something else. Something I couldn't name. Inside the envelope, there was a letter and several neatly folded documents. I had barely read the first words. If you are reading this, it's because I couldn't tell you in person. When a church employee came by announcing that the courtyard had to be cleared to prepare for Mass, I quickly put the letter inside my jacket pocket and walked away from the building with Rosa. We found a bench near the library where the traffic was less heavy. The wind moved some dry leaves behind us. I sat down, took out the letter again, and opened it with both hands. Marcus's voice seemed to rise from the lines. "Mara, I know you've always been responsible. Even more than you had to be. That's why I needed to leave this for you, without anyone else interfering. I want you to have something secure when I'm gone." My vision started to blur. I blinked several times until the letters came back into focus. I kept reading. Marcus wrote that for years he had invested in small buildings, commercial properties, and some properties he had bought at a good price before they appreciated. He had kept it a secret because he wanted to give it to me as a gift for my later years, so I wouldn't have to keep breaking my back working jobs that left me exhausted. With trembling hands, I opened the additional documents. There were 13 property deeds. 13. All in my name. Some buildings, some apartments, even small storefronts. I reviewed them one by one, unable to believe what I was seeing. And there, on one of the deeds, I recognized the name. Riverside Terrace. The same building where Elena and Derek lived. My stomach did a flip. How was it possible that I was the owner of the building where my own son-in-law had thrown me out, as if I were nothing? I ran my finger over the printed address once, twice, 3 times, to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Rosa came back from talking to another woman and saw me holding the papers. "What do you have there?" she asked. "Just some things from my husband. Memories," I replied quickly, putting the documents away. Rosa nodded without asking any more questions. "Take care of them," she said. "Out here, if they see you have papers or something important, they'll try to steal it. Don't let your guard down." I put everything in the inner pocket of my jacket and zipped it up all the way. Suddenly, a few cold drops fell on my head. Within seconds, it started to drizzle. Rosa pointed to the library overhang, and we ran toward it. The water splashed from the sides and wet the floor. I placed the papers on my legs and tried to protect them with my body. I used the blue scarf they had given me to dry the damp corners. The smell of wet paper made my heart race. It was as if I was trying to save the last thing I had left of my life. A library employee came out to remind us not to block the entrance. I apologized and took a couple of steps to the side. Then, I checked my phone. Only 4% battery. I asked Rosa if she knew a place where I could charge it. She nodded without hesitation. "Yeah," she said, "there's a hidden outlet at a bus stop. Not many people know about it." I followed her in the light rain. The outlet was under a metal bench, almost invisible. I plugged in my charger and waited for the phone to come back to life a bit. As the percentage slowly climbed, I opened the documents again. On the last page, there was a name underlined. Camila Torres, attorney, and below it, a phone number. My heart pounded. Maybe she could explain all this. When the phone reached 7%, I made up my mind. I dialed the number with cold fingers and pressed the phone to my ear. The voice that answered was calm, mature. "Yes, this is Mara Casillo," I said. "I believe you knew my husband, Marcus." There was a brief, loaded silence. Then the voice changed. "Mara, is that really you? We've been looking for you for 6 months. Where are you right now?" I looked around. The bus stop was damp, with puddles shining under a gray sky. "At a bus stop downtown," I replied, feeling strange saying it. "Don't move," she ordered. "We'll send someone to pick you up immediately." I hung up. I put the phone away, still shaking, and sat on the cold bench. The water was still falling. though softer now. Rosa watched me from the side. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I have to see someone, an acquaintance," I replied, not knowing how to explain something I couldn't even understand myself. About 25 minutes passed before a black sedan parked in front of the bus stop. A woman in a dark suit got out of the car and walked toward me with a confident stride. She had a folder under her arm and was holding a small sign with my name written on it. "Mrs. Castillo," she said, nodding her head. "I'm from Ms. Torres's office. She's waiting for you. She's waiting for you." The woman carefully took my suitcase, opened the back door of the vehicle, and invited me to get in as if I were someone important. And as she closed the door behind me, still soaked from the rain, I thought that maybe the story of my life wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. A black sedan drove through several streets I knew by heart, though I hadn't been through there in years. I had cleaned offices on those same blocks. I had carried boxes of files under the summer sun, and I had greeted coworkers I wouldn't even remember if I saw them again. I never imagined that one day I would return to these avenues as a passenger in an elegant car, with a driver in a suit opening the door for me. I felt a strange mix of shame, exhaustion, and a premonition I didn't know was good or bad. The car stopped in front of a huge, dark, glass building in the middle of the Los Angeles financial district. The automatic doors opened, and cool air smelling of freshly cleaned marble came out to meet us. The driver gestured for me to follow. My worn-out boots echoed on the shiny floor as we walked to the reception. There were people coming and going with folders, elegant backpacks, phones pressed to their ears. I felt like an intruder. A young receptionist greeted us with a professional smile. She gave me a quick glance, as if trying to figure out what I was doing there. But then she politely asked if we had an appointment. The driver handed her Camila Torres's business card. She nodded, typed something into her computer, and directed us to the elevator. We went up to the 14th floor. When the doors opened, I found myself in a quiet, carpeted hallway decorated with black and white pictures of old buildings. The driver walked to door 147 and knocked twice. A woman in a gray suit came out immediately. It was Camila. She had graying hair, thin glasses, and a firm but calm gaze. When she saw me, she approached without hesitation, as if confirming the presence of someone she had been waiting for months. "Mrs. Castillo," she said. Finally, she shook my hand firmly and led me in. The smell of polished wood filled the office. There was a large table, shelves with labeled binders, and a window that overlooked half of downtown Los Angeles. Camila pointed to a chair next to her desk. Seeing me shiver a little, she found a mug, filled it with hot water, and added a tea bag. "Drink something hot," she said. "Are you safe now?" I took the mug, felt the steam on my face, and for the first time in days, a faint but real sense of relief washed over me. I took Marcus's envelope and all the documents I had been guarding as if they were my life from my jacket. Camilla received them carefully, as if she also felt their emotional weight. She reviewed them one by one, comparing them with digital files on her computer. I heard the sound of the mouse, the soft typing, her small murmurs. After a few minutes, she looked up. "Everything is in order," she announced. "You are the legal owner of 13 properties." I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. It was too much information for a woman who had slept on a piece of cardboard just the night before. Camila continued speaking, explaining that they had been trying to locate me for months. They had called Elena's house. They had sent letters, but Derek never provided my information. I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger, it hurt. Camila opened a safe and took out a thick file. She placed it in front of me. Here's all of Mr. Marcus's history, she said. Purchase agreements, renovations, lease contracts, personal notes. He was very meticulous. I picked up the notebook, where Marcus had written in his firm hand. There were lists of expenses, names of tenants, notes on pending repairs. He had built all of this in silence, without bothering me, without showing off. He always said he didn't want me to work until my body gave out. And still, I never knew the magnitude of what he was doing. Camilla watched me as I turned the pages. "Forgive me for asking," she said softly. "Where are you living right now?" I swallowed. My voice came out almost as a whisper. "On the street. I slept outside last night." Camilla's expression changed immediately. She stood up, took her cell phone, and gave quick instructions to someone. There was no hesitation or surprise, only action. Then she looked at me again. "You can't go on like this. A car will take you to a hotel right now." I wanted to say it wasn't necessary, but she stopped me with a wave of her hand. "It's not a favor, Mrs. Castillo. It's the least you deserve." The driver returned and accompanied me back to the elevator. We went down to the lobby, got into the sedan, and drove to a place I had only ever seen from the outside, the Grand Meridian, a hotel I had always considered to be for the wealthy. The driver opened the door, helped carry my suitcase, and guided me to the reception. The receptionist swiped a room key card and handed it to me with a smile. "Executive Suite, 17th floor. Have an excellent stay." I took the elevator. When I reached the top, the door to the suite opened with a soft beep. I stood still for a few seconds, not daring to go all the way in. It was like entering another life. The room was huge. The white bed looked more comfortable than any I had slept in years. There was a balcony with a view of the entire city. The bathroom gleamed with light marble and soft lights. The driver left my suitcase in a corner and wished me a good night. When I was alone, I opened the minibar, took a bottle of cold water and an apple. I hadn't tasted fresh fruit in days. I sat on the bed with the apple in my hand, as if it were a luxury I didn't yet deserve. Then I went to the bathroom. I turned on the shower and let the hot water cascade over my neck, my back, my hands. I felt the grime of the street wash away, felt the heat restore a little of my dignity. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry, but I was close. I wrapped myself in a large soft towel, sat on the edge of the bed, and checked my phone. No message from Elena. None. I pressed my lips together tightly. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my chest. I called reception to ask for laundry service. They came for my clothes, including the old jacket I hadn't taken off in days. In the hotel restaurant, I ordered a creamy soup, garlic toast, and roasted salmon with herbs. I ate slowly, without rushing, as if my stomach still didn't trust that there would be another meal after this. At the end of dinner, Camila called. "Everything is ready to transfer the administration of the properties," she informed me. "Tomorrow, we'll tour 3 of the main buildings so you can get to know them." I thanked her quietly. I went back to my room. I combed my hair with a hotel comb to look more presentable. An employee brought up a new outfit, navy blue slacks and a crisp white blouse, ironed, perfectly folded. I held them up in front of the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman reflected there. Before going to bed, I opened a second envelope from Marcus's file. It was short, just a few lines. "If anyone hurts you, remember you are not alone." I closed my eyes. I clutched the paper in my fingers. I put it on the nightstand, turned off the light, and settled under the soft sheets. That night, I slept deeply, without stirring, without being cold, without fear. It was the first time in a long time that my body remembered what it was to rest. At dawn, light streamed in through the translucent curtains. The phone vibrated. It was a message from Camila. "I'll pick you up in 30 minutes. Today, we begin." I got up, put on the new outfit, and took a deep breath. I didn't know exactly what awaited me, but for the first time in many years, I felt like I was moving towards something new, something big, something mine. And I knew, as I closed the suite door behind me, that this was only the beginning of a completely different life. The next morning, I went down to the hotel lobby wearing the navy outfit Camila had asked me to wear. I felt strange in it, as if I were wearing someone else's life. Camila was already there, standing by a sofa, a thick briefcase in one hand. When she saw me, she looked up and nodded. "Good morning, Mrs. Castillo. It will be a long day," she said, wasting no time. The driver opened the door of the black sedan as if the gesture was already a natural protocol for me. I settled into the back seat, still with a certain awkwardness every time someone treated me with more respect than I was used to. Camila passed me a folder with a detailed itinerary. "We will review 3 main buildings," she explained. "Hampton Heights, Cedar Plaza, and Riverside Terrace. I want you to see how they work, who manages them, and what decisions you can make as the owner." As we drove down Wilshire Boulevard, the sound of traffic filled the spaces between Camila's words. She talked about rental prices in the area, about demand in Los Angeles, about corporate tenants. It was a lot of information for one day, but I listened carefully. I wanted to understand. I had to. We arrived at Hampton Heights, a medium-sized brick building painted soft cream. At first glance, it seemed well-maintained, but Camila raised an eyebrow when I noticed some stains on the facade. At the entrance, we were greeted by Gloria, the administrator, a woman in her 40s with her hair pulled back in a bun and a fast, confident way of speaking. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Castillo," she said, shaking my hand. "I didn't know you were coming today." Camila gave a slight smile. From now on, she will participate in all important decisions. I felt a little jolt. It was strange to be introduced that way. Gloria led us down the hallways. The smell of disinfectant and old paint mingled. In one stretch of the hallway, 2 lights were flickering. Gloria sighed. "We have requests to replace them, but we're still waiting for budget approval." Camila looked at me as if wordlessly asking if I wanted to authorize it. I nodded simply. "Do it today," I said. Gloria was surprised, but her smile was genuine. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll call the electrician now." We went up to the roof to check the ventilation system. The sun reflected off the hot metal. Camila explained the annual costs, the filter change schedules, the importance of inspections. I asked a few simple questions, and she answered without impatience. For the first time in many days, I felt like someone was teaching me something without judging me. After almost an hour, we returned to the car and headed to Cedar Plaza. When we arrived, I saw several workers on scaffolding painting the facade. Their hands, clothes, and even their faces were stained with white paint. Raymond, the administrator, approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Welcome, Mrs. Castillo," he said. "We're renovating the front, if you can see." Raymond took us to the fire control system room. He showed us panels, alarms, reports. Camila asked for the list of tenants behind on rent. Raymond pulled out a printed spreadsheet and spread it on a table. My eyes went directly to the third line. Derek Thompson, Unit 2B. 1 month overdue. My heart gave a small lurch. Camila watched me out of the corner of her eye. "What do you want us to do?" she asked quietly. I clenched my jaw, took a deep breath, and replied, "Proceed as required. Nothing special." Raymond nodded without further comment. "I'll send the second notification today." We left the building. I still felt a knot in my stomach, but I kept quiet. I didn't want my emotions to interfere with professional decisions. The third destination was Riverside Terrace. As soon as the car turned the corner, I recognized the place. I had visited Elena there when she first moved in alone. Seeing it again from the window of a luxury car gave me a strange feeling, as if life were showing me a distorted reflection of the past. Victor, the administrator, appeared at the entrance with a tablet in hand. He greeted us and began to guide us through the building. In the mail area, I saw several packages piled up. Some had been there for weeks. There are tenants who never pick up their things, Victor explained. We've already sent notices, but nothing. Then he opened an app and showed me the debt chart. 3 apartments appeared in red. Among them, one stood out like an open wound. Unit 4G, Thompson Castillo. 2 months overdue. My chest tightened. It was Elena's apartment, the place where Derek had built his silent dominion. I cleared my throat. What is the behavior of the tenants in 4G? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Victor lowered his voice. The husband is complicated, very impulsive. And the wife, well, she seems to be afraid of him. I nodded slowly. Do what the law requires. No exceptions. Victor was silent, but he understood perfectly. We went down to the parking garage to check the security cameras. Some were partially or totally covered by dry vines. I'll fix it this week, Victor promised, taking notes. When we finished the tour, Camila suggested lunch at a small sandwich shop 2 blocks away. We sat by the window. She ordered coffee. I ordered water. While we ate, she explained the income and expense flows, the pricing policy, pending repairs, and how tenant conflicts were handled. She took out a form. This document authorizes me to send rent adjustments to all properties, just for this initial stage, until you're fully familiar with the operation. I took the pen. My hand trembled for a second, but I signed. I felt like I was officially entering an unknown world, one that Marcus had quietly built for me. Camila took me to a store to buy a new phone and a SIM card for work. In the afternoon, I returned to the hotel. When I opened the door to my suite, I found my shirts folded, my old jacket hanging up, everything impeccably tidy. That contrast, my humble clothes in a luxury room, gave me a feeling I wasn't sure was gratitude or displacement. I turned on the TV just to have background noise while I reviewed the emails Camila had sent. There were over 150 pages of reports. I focused on one tab. Riverside Terrace adjusted rent notice. The notice had already been sent. Below it was a list of tenant responses. The first one read, Derek Thompson, voicemail received 6:47 p.m. Requests to meet with the owner. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I closed it without listening to the message. At 7:30, the room phone rang. It was the reception informing me there was a package for me. I went down to get it. It was another outfit, charcoal slacks and a soft gray sweater, perfectly packaged. I took it to the room and hung it in the closet, thinking that I had never in my life owned 2 new outfits at the same time. Before going to bed, I went out onto the balcony. From there, the car lights formed bright, endless lines. The night air carried a faint smell of hot asphalt in the distance. I leaned on the railing and breathed deeply. The second day of my new life as an owner was over. I knew that the next day there would be more work, more decisions, more revelations. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Just a strange, quiet calm, as if I was finally occupying a place that had always been destined for me, even though I didn't know it. The next morning, with the outfit from the day before still hanging behind the door, I went down to the lobby to meet Camila. She was already there, reviewing thick papers in a black briefcase. She greeted me with a serious but kind nod. Today, we make it all official, she said as we walked out to the street. The black sedan was waiting. The driver opened the back door for me with the same usual courtesy. It didn't surprise me as much anymore, but I still felt that little twinge of discomfort, as if the luxurious seat wasn't really mine. As we moved through the morning traffic of Los Angeles, Camila reviewed every step of the legal process. We arrived at the corporate building where Castillo Holdings LLC would operate. We entered a meeting room with a long table, 6 chairs, and a pile of documents that looked like they could hold a door open. The lawyer handling the company registration brought in 6 binders, each almost the size of an old phone book. "Each one requires your signature, Mrs. Castillo," he told me gently. Here, and here. I spent over an hour signing. My hand got tired several times. I had to stop to stretch it. Camila explained certain terms, clauses I had never heard of, concepts that belonged to a world Marcus had secretly lived in for years, while I was still working exhausting shifts in offices and stores. When we finished, Camila opened her laptop and started reviewing the emails received from the 3 building administrators. With a raised eyebrow, she commented, "Most accepted the rent adjustment without complaint. A few had minor questions. And here?" She paused. She looked at the screen with a mixture of amusement and resignation. "This one is from Derek Thompson." My chest tightened, though I showed no visible sign. Camila lowered her voice a bit. "He's threatening to sue the owner for abusive increase and harassment," she added. "He has no idea who you are." I tried to keep my face neutral, but I felt a warm knot rising from my stomach. It wasn't pride or satisfaction. It was a more bitter mix, disappointment, weariness, a kind of sadness that no longer surprised me. "Proceed as the law dictates," I told her. "I want no exceptions." Camila nodded immediately. She closed the computer and invited me to visit 2 more buildings. One small one in Fairfax, boutique style, with narrow balconies and hanging plants. Another in Santa Monica, old, with elevators that looked like they were from the 70s. In Fairfax, an elderly man approached me slowly, leaning on a cane. He introduced himself as Mr. Patterson and told me the elevator got stuck almost every day. "I don't have the knees to climb 4 floors anymore." He told me with a tired smile. "I'll send a technician today," I replied. "I promise you." The man took my hand for a second, as if the gesture meant much more than I imagined. As we were leaving, Camila received a message. She read it, sighed, and passed me the phone so I could see the text. It was from Victor, the administrator of Riverside Terrace. "Unit 4G, officially 2 months behind. Final notice sent." My heart clenched, but I kept my gaze steady. "Do you want to wait before starting the eviction process?" Camila asked me, giving me space. I shook my head. "No, do what's required." Inside, it hurt. Of course it hurt. It was my daughter's home. It was my son-in-law's name. It was the same place where I had been told I was a burden. But I also knew that allowing more time would only feed a problem that had been growing like mold on wood for years. That afternoon, Camila filed the papers to request the eviction hearing, not just for 4G, but for 2 other apartments that were chronically behind. I signed everything with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. 3 days later, I received a brief message from Camila. "Hearing, Friday, 9 a.m. We arrived at the courthouse with time to spare. The building had a mixed smell of dampness, paper, and old coffee. We sat in the back row. I leaned forward a little, trying not to be noticed. 10 minutes later, Derek and Elena entered. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt, had a scruffy beard, and his eyes were red as if he hadn't slept. Elena walked behind him, her gaze fixed on the floor, clutching a folded folder. She didn't look up once. Derek was making quick, desperate calls, his leg bouncing non-stop. Several times, he hit the seat in front of him with an open hand. I watched it all from a distance, feeling an uncomfortable hollowness in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was something else, the bitter feeling of seeing what my own daughter's life had become. When the clerk called the case, Derek stood up, pulling Elena by the arm. He walked past me without recognizing me. He smelled like cold coffee and anxiety. In front of the judge, Derek puffed out his chest and spoke loudly, almost theatrically. "This owner is inhuman. She raised the rent without justification. She's abusing us, a family with a young child. Elena glanced over, surprised. They didn't have any children. I wanted to intervene, to say something, but Camila brushed my arm as a signal to stay calm. The judge asked for proof of payment. Derek fumbled with his phone, swiped the screen several times, but he had no receipts. Elena tried to explain in a trembling voice, "We've been going through financial difficulties." But Derek cut her off with a sharp whisper. "Shut up. Let me talk." Camila approached the table and handed over the documents, the contract, notifications, market adjustments, and the complete history of pending payments. The judge reviewed them for barely a minute. "Unit 4G, he said in a firm tone. 2 months without payment. There is no evidence of payment. The decision is eviction within a maximum of 10 days. Derek slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the room. The judge looked up. "One more outburst and I will sanction you, Mr. Thompson." Elena burst into tears. She raised a hand, asking for a little more time, but the judge shook his head. 10 days. I cannot authorize more." Derek stormed out first, furious, kicking a chair in the hallway. Elena followed him with small steps, wiping away the tears that wouldn't stop falling. I watched them go, never knowing I was right there, so close. Camila gathered the papers and looked at me discreetly. "Do you wish to speak with them now?" I thought for a few seconds. I looked at the door they had left through, heard the echoes of Elena's footsteps fading down the corridor. "No," I said finally. "Not yet." We left the courthouse. A strong wind was blowing, kicking up dry leaves and moving the hem of my jacket. In the parking lot, the black sedan gleamed under the midday sun. "Are you all right?" Camila asked as we got in the car. "Yes," I replied. "I'm as I should be." As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Camila's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen, silenced it, and put the phone face down. "Derek," she said without emotion. "He's left another message. Threats mixed with pleas. Blindly, a man who doesn't understand that the power he had over others is crumbling because it never belonged to him." In the distance, I watched the courthouse grow smaller through the window. The clouds were moving fast, and a ray of light broke through, landing on a crosswalk. I took a deep breath. "Camila," I said without taking my eyes off the road, "I think the time has come." She nodded, as if she had been waiting for my words for days. "Then we will prepare everything," she replied. And just like that, I knew the next step wouldn't be legal or administrative. It would be personal. Very personal. The morning after the hearing, with the judge's voice still echoing in my head, I received a message from Camila at 7:12. It was short, but it said exactly what I expected. "Derek has called 3 more times this morning. He insists on meeting with the owner." I replied immediately with a surprisingly steady hand. "Arrange the meeting. Office 147. Camila agreed without asking questions and added that it would be good for me to arrive 20 minutes early to get everything set up. I took the charcoal outfit they had given me the day before and laid it carefully on the bed. I looked at it for a few seconds. The fabric seemed too good for a woman who just 2 weeks ago was sleeping on a cement bench. Still, I put it on calmly. I adjusted the sweater in the mirror, combed my still damp hair, and took a deep breath before leaving the room. The driver was waiting downstairs. He opened the car door for me with the same courtesy as always. During the ride, Camila called to review the final details. "Sit on the inside of the table," she told me. "I want him to see you as soon as he enters." I nodded without a word. Her tone was professional, but there was a clear intention behind it. To make the truth land on Derek without any warning. We arrived at the glass building. The elevator took longer than usual to go up. Maybe because of the number of people at that hour, but I finally reached the 14th floor. Camila was already there, standing in front of the door to Office 147, with a composure so calm it made me think she had lived through hundreds of scenes like this. "Take a seat here," she instructed. "Keep the bottle of water nearby and these documents." Leave them in sight. She placed 3 thick folders on the table. One of them had Marcus's name written on it by hand. It hurt a little to see it, but I let it stay there. Barely 10 minutes passed when Camila's phone rang. It was the receptionist from the floor below. "Derek Thompson has arrived. He's on his way up." Camila gave me a signal to straighten my back. I sat up firmly, my hands resting on the table, trying to contain any shaking. She positioned herself to the side of the room, like a neutral observer. The door burst open without a knock. Derek entered first. His hair was messy. He had deep dark circles, and his shirt was wrinkled. His movements were fast, nervous. Behind him came Elena, her face clearly exhausted. Her eyes were swollen, as if she hadn't slept. Derek took 2 steps and then froze. His gaze shot through me, as if he had seen a ghost. Elena took a second longer to react, but when she saw me sitting there, her lips parted, and she brought a hand to her mouth. "Mom," she stammered. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. There was no need. Derek blinked several times, as if his brain was trying to reconstruct the scene. What the hell is this?" he said, looking at Camila. "I asked to speak with the owner of the building, not with her." Camila replied with an almost surgical calm. "She is the owner of the building." The silence that fell was so heavy, I could feel it in my chest. Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Elena as if searching for support, but she avoided his gaze. Finally, he managed to articulate, She's the what?" "That's right," Camila said. "She is the general owner of all 13 properties." Derek swallowed, took 2 steps closer to the table, and repeated, "You're behind the rent increase?" "Yes," I replied. Elena slowly sat down in the chair across from me, still clutching her crumpled folder. She seemed to be trying to understand something that had been escaping her for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom?" she murmured. "Why?" "There was never an opportunity," I answered. "And you know why." She looked down. Then, Derek changed completely. The surprise lasted less time than I expected. As soon as he thought he had regained his footing, he leaned forward, trying to be imposing. "What do you want? Revenge? To make me look like an idiot?" Camila intervened before I could answer. "Watch your tone. This meeting is being recorded." Derek took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Then, feigning cordiality, he sat down and said, "Let's talk like adults. This can all be fixed." I slid the folder with the delinquency notice, the judge's order, and the process documents toward him. I said nothing. There was no need. Derek took them, glanced at the first few pages, and his expression changed again. He paused when he saw Marcus's signature on some old contracts, and his eyes widened slightly. Elena began to cry silently. Her hand was shaking as she opened her own rental folder. She tried to explain. "Mom, I didn't want this. We've been having problems, but—" Brian interrupted her abruptly. "You don't have to apologize. It's not your fault. It's her fault for not wanting to help us." Camila, now visibly tired of Derek's attitude, spoke firmly. "We're not here to argue about blame. We're here to execute a court order." Derek leaned toward me, this time with a softer, almost pleading tone. "Look, Mara, give me 3 months. Just 3. I'll pay everything. I give you my word." I looked him in the eye. There was no hatred in me, only clarity. "The judge's decision is 10 days," I replied. Derek gritted his teeth. Elena broke down, covering her face. "Mom, it's me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of this." To me, I nodded, not to forgive her or to blame her, just to acknowledge her pain. Derek shot up from his chair. He pushed it back, looking around like a cornered animal. You could tell he wanted to scream, but he knew he was at a disadvantage. He lowered his voice and addressed Camila. "Let's negotiate. We can always negotiate something." "And the only thing I can negotiate," Camila replied, "is the exact day you will leave the apartment. Within the 10-day period. Nothing more." Derek cursed under his breath. Elena, exhausted, stood up slowly, and walked toward the door. He tried to grab her arm, but she dodged him without looking at him. "Mom," she said one more time, in a thin whisper, "I wish things had been different." And she left. Derek followed her with hurried steps. The door closed, not with a slam, but with a weight that was felt in the whole body. Camila gathered the documents. "Everything legal is closed," she told me. "Now you can get on with your life." I stood up, adjusted my sweater, and took a deep breath. Camila asked if I wanted to go to Riverside Terrace to supervise the move-out when the day came. "No," I replied. "That's what I have administrators for." We went out into the hallway and got into the elevator. The doors closed slowly, and I saw my reflection in the polished metal. I was no longer the woman who had been thrown onto the street with a suitcase and 200 crumpled dollars. I was someone new, someone who had finally reclaimed her place. The next morning, I left the Grand Meridian Hotel with a calm that still surprised me. The lobby was full of tourists checking their bags, employees pushing carts with clean towels, baristas serving coffee in a hurry. I walked out the revolving doors with just one suitcase and an address written on a piece of paper Camila had given me last night. Pasadena, a quiet neighborhood, a small house, just what you want. The driver dropped me off in front of a street lined with jacaranda trees, their purple blooms covering part of the sidewalk. The house was in the middle of the block, a one-story home with a terracotta tile roof, a small front garden, and a stone path leading to the front door. I put the key in the lock, and as I opened it, a soft smell of fresh paint enveloped me. The living room was simple, with a large window overlooking the backyard. The kitchen, though smaller than Elena's, had a quiet charm. Light wood cabinets, a new electric stove, and a countertop where I imagined making coffee early. I touched each faucet just to check the water pressure. Old habits I didn't know how to abandon. The faucets worked perfectly. I heard the strong, solid sound, as if the house was telling me I could trust it. A few minutes later, Camila arrived with a thin folder and a restrained smile. "Here is the final contract." She handed me the official keys. "As of today, this house is yours." I signed the papers without rushing. I no longer felt the anxiety of signing like in the first days with her. Now things had a different rhythm, more certain, more mine. I walked Camila to the door and watched her get into the black car, which pulled away slowly down the street. When the house was quiet, I unpacked my suitcase. I hung my clothes in the closet, folded my pants, put my socks in the smallest drawer. This simple routine gave me back a sense of control I hadn't had in a long time. I walked to the nearest supermarket. I bought bread, vegetables, some chicken, and a small pot of yellow roses that caught my eye. I placed it on the kitchen windowsill, right where the afternoon light came in. At 4, I went out to the backyard. I found a set of gardening tools left by the previous owners. I started pulling weeds, turning the soil carefully. The warm breeze touched my neck. An elderly neighbor stopped at the fence. "I'm Lucia," she said, smiling. "I live in the corner house. If you want, I have some better shears for trimming those branches." I accepted the loan. Her kindness was simple, genuine. It reminded me of times I thought I had lost. While I was pruning the rosebush, some kids on bikes rode by, laughing down the street. One of them raised her hand and waved at me as if she had known me before. I waved back and kept cutting until the bush took on a decent shape. I bought some potting soil and made a small rectangle in a corner of the garden. I pressed the earth with my knuckles, breathing in the damp smell that always made me think of my childhood. When evening fell, I turned on the porch light and sat in a wooden chair, looking at the neighborhood. The silence was different from the nights on the street. Here, there was no fear, no hurried footsteps, no drunken voices, just the distant sound of a car passing and the gentle movement of the jacaranda branches. The phone vibrated. It was a message from Camila. "Derek and Elena have left apartment 4G. The administrator has already changed the lock." I replied simply, "Understood." I put the phone away, feeling no triumph or relief, just a quiet acceptance that this chapter was finally closed. 3 days later, I decided to go to the volunteer center in Glendale, just as I had been thinking for some time. I asked about the food distribution program. They gave me a light jacket with the center's logo. And I joined the group preparing trays for families in need. As we were handing them out, I recognized someone in the line, Rosa. Her hair was a little longer, but it was her. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. "Well, look at you, Mara," she said, laughing. "You look like a politician now." I laughed too and handed her an extra food packet. "I'm just starting over," I said. "That's life," she replied, putting the packet in her backpack. It takes strange turns, but sometimes it surprises us. We said goodbye there, among boxes of fruit and bags of bread. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was giving back a little of what I had received. That night, I returned to my new house. I showered, made a hot tea, and pinned Marcus's letter to a corkboard above my desk. Right next to it, I placed the first utility bill for the new home. It was my way of telling myself that everything, old and new, had its own place in this house. I opened the window. The night air came in, smelling of freshly cut grass. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. At 9, the phone vibrated again. Elena. I stood still, feeling a slight weight in my chest. Not pain. Something more complex. I answered. "Mom." Her voice was weak, as if she had been crying. "I left Derek. I'm staying with a friend. I need time to fix myself." There was a brief silence. I could hear her shaky breathing. "I'd like to see you," she added. "When you're ready. I don't want to force you." I looked out at the backyard through the glass. The jacaranda leaves trembled gently under the yellow porch light. "We can see each other," I said, "when we're both truly ready." She let out a short sob, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was relief. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. After hanging up, I went out to the patio again. I turned on the small solar lights I had staked along the fence that morning. They lit the garden with a faint, warm glow. I took the watering can, watered the freshly turned earth, and smelled the damp soil rising from the grass. Above me, a few stars fought to shine through the city's light pollution. I stayed like that for several minutes, without moving, listening to the faint chirp of crickets. Then I closed the door, turned off the lights, and made my bed. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. That day wasn't just the end of a painful story. It was the quiet, firm beginning of a completely new life. A life where I was no longer the woman who cooked soup in someone else's kitchen, hoping for crumbs of love. I was Mara Castillo, owner of 13 properties, survivor of the streets, and most importantly, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity one deliberate step at a time. And as I drifted off to sleep that night in my own house, in my own bed, under my own roof, I understood something Marcus had been trying to tell me all along. That true strength isn't measured by how much you can endure, but by how you rise when the world has pushed you to your knees. This wasn't revenge. This was resurrection.